Eating 30 eggs for 30 days was something Joseph Everett, from what I've learned, did on his YouTube channel. But not only he did it on his YouTube channel, but also on himself. Since one egg has approximately 100 calories, this means he already ate 3,000 calories. I was actually very interested in this experiment, since I also experimented more with eggs. In the last weeks and months, I ate up to 10 eggs, maybe 15 eggs in a given day. Mostly because it is just a very good vegetarian protein source, even though it is not a vegetarian protein lover. According to a recent blog post, he did gain, apparently, muscle, but what he also gained is fat. And here, the potential downside of experimenting on yourself in such a big and clickbaity fashion comes into play. He, for example, also could have just eaten 20 eggs in 30 days, but 30 eggs for 30 days just might have sounded a little bit better. As I understand it, the problem with gaining fat is the following. It is very easy to build fat cells, but once the fat cell is established, it kind of influences how your body interacts with the real world. So you can potentially also kill off fat cells, at least to my knowledge, by cool sculpting them, which means you introduce some kind of very cool environment to the fat cells itself. And due to the fat cells, so let's say this is a muscle, for example, and we have a little bit of fat cells in there. Of course, not directly in the muscle, but for the sake of the argument, this is just easier now. If you now introduce cold into the whole scenario and you see what happens, what seems to happen is that fat cells are just a little bit more likely to suffer from severe damage, basically from the cold. So it was observed that in children that had popsicle eyes, so basically the eyes you can take and then pop out of the thing, and you can just consume it that way. Therefore, you are basically cooling down your cheeks and your mouth. It was observed that they seem to have leaner faces. Now, there are some institutes and so on and so forth which provide cool sculpting. But apart from this very weird effect that also cannot be applied all over your body, you could make an argument that potentially cold exposure over time would kill off some of the fat cells, but maybe also not, because that's only the skin layer then, obviously. The main part about the face is that you can ingest things into the face and then cool it from the inside out, but you cannot do it with your hand, your pack, or your stomach. Joseph's Everett 30 eggs, 30 days journey, therefore, I think exemplifies two things. Or let's say three. One, the potential downside of doing short-term experiments for whatever purpose is that you screw up kind of your habits, probably. So if he already had good eating habits and he seemed to do all right in terms of body fat, then you might potentially alter them and it might be more difficult to reintroduce them. Second, especially with nutrition, one just might not benefit from experimenting too much at a given time. The same with every other thing that relies not more and more, but that is mostly based on habituation over time, such as sleep, for example. I experimented over the last years with many different sleep cycles. One of these was that I only slept 4 hours in the night and then 20 minutes in a given day, but times 3. No, it was even times 6. This meant that I slept 4 hours in the night and 6 times 20 minutes during the day whenever I just felt a little bit tired. Whenever I just felt a little bit tired. The main problem with experiments like these is that they screw up the thing you had before running. And if you then don't have a plan for afterwards, which he kind of has apparently, because in order to get rid of some of the fat, what he did is he gained the fat and then he did a 5-day water fast apparently, which might have taken some of the fat off again. The problem he now has is that he has probably some altered habits. But as the third and final point, what he also might have gained is just a little bit of new insight into whether eggs or more eggs is something that actually works for him. And by experimenting this much, by isolating a factor this much, such as just eating eggs, and seeing If there are negative effects from eating eggs, such as possibly gaining weight if eating too much eggs, he can now again take this variable of his nutrition and reintroduce it in a way that makes more sense than before. Of course, at the end, only he will be able to judge whether this experiment of eating 30 eggs in 30 days was a net benefit or a net negative, but since it also is a video that is living on his YouTube and he experiments for a living, you could say, there is also a financial aspect to it. But with every deviation from something that works, or maybe it didn't work that properly and he wanted to try something new, of course there is some upsides involved, but there are also some downsides involved, such as now having potentially a little bit more fat cells that one cannot really get rid of anymore.